In the hush of early morning, when the ocean's surface was tinted with the faint glow of dawn, an ancient demigod named Tumaya stepped onto the black sand shore. His deep brown eyes flickered with concern. For weeks, the tides had brought unsettling signs. Shoals of fish washed ashore, scales turning greenish-black with an unnatural slime. The sea breezes that once carried the fresh scent of brine now reeked of decay. Tumaya sensed a subversion of the natural order, a malignant presence twisting the harmony of Tangaroa's domain. The elders of his village whispered about a sea witch, Maraki, who had gained terrifying power by making bargains with dark entities that lurked in forgotten ocean depths. They spoke of monstrous transformations among sea creatures, of sharks no longer content to swim peacefully, but instead driven mad by a hunger that defied reason. Their once pristine coral reefs turned grey, the colours drained as if by some invisible poison. Tuumaya, who had inherited a fraction of Tangaroa's spirit from his forebears, took it upon himself to protect his people. Though a humble man, he was revered for his strength and bravery. As a child, he had wrestled an eel the length of 4 men to free a flooded river. And even now, in adulthood, faint scars on his arms remembered that struggle. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, his hair woven into intricate braids, each thread a tribute to the ancestors before him. The demigod gazed out at the sea, noticing the subtle swirl of corrupted currents, and he felt the fluttering call of an unavoidable duty stirring in his chest. The time had come to confront the cause of this rot that threatened to consume ocean life. Gathering a pouch of sacred shells from an intricately carved wooden chest, Tuumaya slung them over his shoulder. These shells carried the blessings of the Atua, the divine guardians of the ocean and land, each embedding within it a whisper of power. He wore around his neck a small bone pendant shaped like a fishhook, blessed by the village Tohonga for courage. He had never faced a threat quite like a sea witch who could bend the tides to her own twisted ends. But instincts older than memory guided his heart. Clouds overhead thickened, and a low rumble of thunder echoed across the horizon. Tumaya stepped into the surf, water swirling around his ankles in a slow, lethargic spiral, as if the ocean itself was succumbing to a fevered illness. His journey began that afternoon. Steering a traditional waka, a slim wooden canoe etched with tribal carvings, Tumaya followed the patterns in the water faint, unnatural disruptions like veins of darkness pulsing beneath the surface. He used a paddle carved from ancient wood, inlaid with markings that told the story of creation, a reminder that his lineage traced back to epic adventures woven into the tapestry of the world. The wind moaned in his ears, carrying ghostly echoes from the ocean's depths. More than once he paused to scoop a dying fish from the waves, offering soft words of comfort while he examined its strange affliction. Their eyes were clouded, and at their mouths clung tendrils of inky residue that stained Tumaya's fingertips. When nighttime arrived, he set camp on a jagged atoll. A partial moon watched from a sky swirling with storm clouds scorched orange and purple along the edges. He built a small fire from driftwood, its struggling flames dancing in protest against the gale. Sleep came grudgingly, and restless visions haunted him. He saw images of Maraki in his dreams, a tall, willowy figure with slick black hair coiling in the air like serpents. Her eyes burned a venomous green, and she chanted words that rang in Tuumaya's head like an echo across an undersea canyon. She beckoned monstrous forms to her side, creatures of shell and fang fused together by some vile alchemy. One of these nightmares lunged for him in mid-dream, screeching with an otherworldly cry. Tumaya woke in a cold sweat, the final echo of the dream lingering for a few heartbeats before fading into wind and darkness. In the flickering shadows beyond his camp, Tumaya thought he glimpsed something or someone standing at the water's edge. A swirl of dark hair, a whisper of a shape that vanished the instant he blinked. Rising to his feet, he approached, adrenaline coursing through his veins. But there was nothing. only the gentle motion of the tidal pools where phosphorescent blooms glowed a faint blue. Still, a chill clung to the back of his neck, and he steeled himself with a prayer to the gods, focusing on the carved hook around his neck. Eventually, he slipped into a restless half-sleep, lulled by the ocean's lament and the creak of the wind. Morning arrived with a torrential downpour. Sheets of rain hammered the atoll, as though the sky was trying to cleanse the ocean of its sickness. Quickly, Torumaya strapped his supplies into the whacker and pushed out into the churning sea, letting the rising wind fill the small sail. He guided the canoe through pounding waves, each crest more ferocious than the last, as if the ocean was testing his resolve or warning him of what lay ahead. His arms strained, and salt spray mingled with sweat on his brow. For hours he pressed on, until at last the storm grudgingly subsided. The air cooled, and a low fog clung to the water, muffling the clang of the sail and his paddle's splash. In the early afternoon, the silhouette of a jagged cliff came into view, the rumoured domain of Meraki. Black basalt pillars jutted from the sea, cutting sharp lines against the grey sky. Tumaya's breath caught when he realized the surrounding waters were thick with dead coral shards, drifting aimlessly like pale ghosts in the tide. Life had been drained from these reefs, and the fish that swam here looked mutilated, with bloated eyes and battered, diseased scales. Something about the place felt fundamentally wrong, like the world had been flipped inside out. Here sea currents swirled in chaotic tangles, as if obeying another master's call. Pulling ashore on a small grey sand beach at the base of the cliff, Tumaya prepared to climb. Lengths of rope wound around his torso, and he carried a woven bag with leftover provisions. Sharp basalt edges cut at his palms, and the wet rock tested his grip. He scaled the cliff cautiously, never looking down at the swirling sea below. About halfway up, a piercing cry made him pause. Hovering in the gloom just beyond reach was a monstrous stingray, suspended in midair, its fins warped by some unholy power. Its wide mouth gaped, revealing barbed teeth, and it hung in a grotesque limbo between flight and water. Tumaya, heart-hammering, remembered how the stories told that Meraki had begun breathing new and unnatural life into sea creatures, giving them abilities they should never have possessed. The demigod pressed himself flat against the rock. The stingray drifted closer, an abomination of wings and malignant intent. With a tight grip, Todumaya pulled a small conch shell from his pouch. He cupped it to his lips, blew a resonant note, and the tone sent a subtle vibration through the nightmarish stingray. Dazed, the creature let out a low squeal before swirling away into the fog. It was only a temporary measure, but Todumaya had no wish to kill an animal ensnared by wicked enchantments. Summoning his resolve, he continued his ascent, each footstep carrying him closer to the lair of the sea witch. Inside a plateau-like hollow at the cliff's summit lay Meraki's domain, a wide grotto carved by centuries of wind and water, though now twisted by an evil presence. The ground was slick with algae that pulsed a sickly green. A massive tide pool stood at the centre, steaming with noxious vapours. Coral shards, broken shells, and the remains of sea creatures lay scattered across the uneven floor. Tumaya felt a surge of mingled disgust and sorrow, for in many of these remains he saw the takes of normal ocean life relentlessly experimented upon. Dark magic had taken root here, warping everything it touched. Meraki stood before the tide pool, exactly as his dream had shown, tall and slender, with hair that rippled down her back like an inky waterfall. Her ebony robe trailed over the stone, dripping brine and seaweed. When she turned, Tumaya was struck by the glow in her eyes, a green so intense it felt radioactive, a colour pulsing with power. She raised a hand, and the waters in the tide pool swirled in reaction, forming a roiling whirlpool that made the entire chamber echo with an undercurrent of tortured screams. Around her, half-living bits of coral twitched in an agonized dance. "Tumaya," she said, a mocking lilt stretching across her black lips. The demigod who fancies himself a guardian of sea and land. How righteous you are to come challenge me in my domain. He stepped forward, every muscle tensed, clutching a sacred shell in his palm. Your curses have poisoned these waters and tormented innocent life. I've come not to relish a fight, but to end your tyranny and restore balance. Maraki's laughter rang out, a chilling echo bouncing off the grotto walls. She lifted her hands, forming complex gestures that glowed with greenish energy. Balance is an illusion. True power comes from seizing the forces of creation for oneself. Your ancestors drew strength from Tangaroa, harnessing the ocean's gifts. Now I hold that authority. Witness what it means to shape life and death at will. She thrust her arms downward, and a rising hiss came from the steaming tide pool. A monstrous shape emerged, a hybrid creature fusing the sinewy grace of an eel with the flukes of a giant whale and the jagged carapace of a crustacean. Its skin glistened with green phosphorescence, and eyes flared crimson with mindless aggression. With a single roar, it thrashed its segmented tail, sending a spray of boiling water across the grotto floor. Tumaya responded quickly, thrusting his own power into the sacred shell he held. A golden glow emanated from it, forming a wavering barrier of shimmering light, just as the creature spat acidic foam in his direction. The sizzling venom struck the barrier and evaporated, but maintaining the protective glow demanded a constant stream of Tumaya's spiritual energy. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he gritted his teeth, chanting an ancestral karakia to fortify the shield. Simultaneously, the abomination hammered at him with its armored tail. The demigod used the brief respite to roll to the side, letting the creature's tail lash out against the stone floor, shattering splinters of rock. He rose to a crouch and placed the shell to his lips again, blowing a haunting melody that reverberated through the cave. The sacred note rippled outward, causing the enormous hybrid creature to recoil, its flailing movements momentarily still. A second note shifted the seas around them, the tide pool trembling as divine energies tried to disrupt Maraki's twisted spells. The creature, caught between Tuumaya's call and the sea witch's command, shrieked in confusion, flailing its limbs in a wild frenzy. Maraki scoffed, a sneer creasing her pale face, and she tightened her grip on the swirling waters. With a gesture, she slammed her open palm down, sending a wave of oily darkness through the cave. The wave crashed into Tumaya like a physical force, propelling him backward until he struck the cavern wall. Pain shot through his shoulder, and he gasped, doubling over. Every part of him wanted to collapse, but he fought to keep upright. The demigod forced himself to stand, ignoring the throbbing ache. "You are strong, Tumaya," she hissed, voice echoing with 1,000 watery whispers. "But strength alone will not save you here. I command the ocean's fury now." She reached into the swirling tide pool and withdrew a grotesque staff, carved from the bone of some colossal beast. The staff's tip was crowned with a glowing green pearl that seemed to pulse in time with the very heartbeat of darkness. Instantly, Teomea felt the currents in his blood respond, battered by a wave of dread. He realized he was up against not just a powerful sorceress, but a force that had consumed an ocean's worth of sorrow and rot. It was an affront to life itself. Refusing to succumb to despair, Tumaya began a chant taught by the village Tohunga, an ancient invocation meant to call upon Tangaroa. Though battered and in pain, he raised his voice, bridging the realms of the physical and the spiritual. "Rise, O great sea, father of fish and whales. We beg for your guidance. Grant us the power to protect what is sacred." Rumbled reverberated with deeper resonance, making the walls tremble. Slowly, the swirling gloom above them flickered with a silver light. The monstrous creature that had surged at Totumaya faltered, its many eyes darting about in panic, as if hearing the echo of the true ocean's call. Totumaya's chant, fueled by faith and his lineage, fought to unravel the chains binding the sea creatures under Maraki's spell. But Maraki responded with a howl of ragged fury. She lifted the staff, the glowing pearl intensifying, and from its eerie luminescence, tendrils of darkness erupted. They lurched toward Tomaya like serpents. He countered by holding forth another of his sacred shells, a twisted spiral flecked with gold. As he whispered a short prayer, the shells shone in white gold brilliance, burning away the darkness that coiled around him. As battle of magical energies erupted in the grotto, green malevolence against golden resilience, each swirling in the air like phantom ribbons. The tide pool mirrored their conflict, roiling with furious eddies one moment, then calming under shimmering pulses of light the next. Steam hissed from the churning water, and the entire chamber grew stifling. The floor, soaked in brine, hissed as acid splattered from the monstrous abomination still thrashing about. Tomaya ducked beneath a wild swipe of its tail, narrowly avoiding a set of barbed hooks that sprouted from its flukes. Despite his exhaustion, he capitalized on the opening. Swiftly, he drove a spear of golden light directly into the creature's side. A shock wave pulsed through its unnatural form, and it let out an unholy screech that rattled the basalt columns. Yet Meraki did not relent. The sea witch gritted her teeth, and the monstrous hybrid's wounds began to knit themselves, closing over with glowing green tissue. The staff flared once more, and Tomaya watched in horror as the sea witch began chanting in an unknown tongue, possibly older than his line of demigods. With every syllable, a lifeless chunk of coral or a fissured shell on the cave floor rattled, inching of its own accord, merging with the monstrous creature's flesh. Each piece grafted onto bone, forming new limbs and spines, reshaping the abomination into an even deadlier form. Realizing this could go on indefinitely, Tomaya searched desperately for a weakness in Meraki's hold. Words from the ancient Tohunga echoed in his mind. A curse's chains rest upon an anchor. Shatter it, and the curse unravels. It dawned on him that the anchor might be the staff, or the glowing green pearl at its tip. His gaze fell upon it, and he recalled the whispering sea lore of pearls formed from sorrow or rage, pearls that bound the tides to their master's heart. That was his target. Without pause, Tomaya pressed a final shell, a polished cowrie, to his lips. This was the mightiest of the set, the one entrusted to him on the day he accepted the responsibility of protecting the seas. Drawing in a deep breath, he blew a low, unwavering note that pulsed like waves in a storm. From the shell burst a flash of lightning-bright energy that careened toward Meraki's staff. The moment it struck, sparks exploded in all directions, sizzling energy dancing across the cavern. Meraki shrieked, struggling to maintain her hold on the staff. Her once composed features contorted with shock and rage as a crack spread across the pearl. The monstrous creature howled, rearing back as if in pain, reeling under the sudden break in its link to Meraki's power. Tomaya seized the moment and lunged. Although waves of darkness battered him, he pushed forward, ignoring the sting of acidic foam that splattered across his thighs and arms. His braids whipped around his face in the swirling currents of cursed wind. Step by agonizing step, he advanced, eyes fixed on the cracked pearl. Meraki raised her free hand, conjuring twisted spears of green magic that arced toward the intruder. Tomaya focused fiercely, projecting the protective golden shield around himself. Still, each spear that clashed with his shield felt like a hammer blow to his core. His vision blurred, and each breath turned into a ragged gasp. But forward he pressed. Summoning a wellspring of final strength, Tomaya vaulted past the flailing limbs of Meraki's mutated minion. His bare feet splashed through the steaming tide pool, ignoring the pain from the scalding water. He aimed straight for the staff. With one resounding strike, he brought the carved fishhook pendant around his neck, cracking down upon it, forging a desperate fusion of physical blow and spiritual assault. A shockwave erupted, sending both Tomaya and Meraki flying in opposite directions. The staff, severed at the midpoint, exploded into shards of bone and seaweed. The luminous pearl, split in half, cascaded greenish sparks that evaporated against the limestone walls. Upulous horror screamed at me. For a single moment, everything froze. The swirling currents of evil magic, the abomination's unholy roars, even the noxious fumes from the tide pool seemed suspended in time. Then a wave of liberation rippled outward. The monstrous creature spasmed, its patchwork body dissolving and sloughing off the coral and shells that had been forcibly grafted. Great lumps of mutated tissue melted away into the tide pool. Freed fish and eels tumbled out, battered and confused, but alive. Greenish swirls evaporated from their scales as they took in new, quivering breaths. All across the cliffside grotto, the unnatural growths receded, as though a tide of corruption was receding from the realm of the living. Tumaya lay on his side, pain raging in his ribs and arms. Part of his chest was burned where acidic foam had seeped through his protective barrier. Still, he mustered the strength to crawl forward. He spotted Maraki sprawled against a jagged rock. Her black hair spilled across the algae-coated floor. She groaned, eyes flickering between green and a fading grey. In the dying glow of the broken pearl, Tuumaya saw exhaustion in her gaze and something he had not expected. Fear. Her powers all but gone, her malevolent illusions shattered. Maraki looked small, just another mortal whose ambition had outstripped her humanity. He approached, breathing heavily, unsure if she was too dangerous to be left alone. A part of him felt the stirring of compassion. Some older voice in his mind cautioned mercy, but he also recognized the harm she had wrought. Dead creatures littered the seas because of her twisted thirst for power. She had threatened the balance of life. There would be no quick redemption. His breath was ragged as he raised a trembling hand. "You cannot destroy everything I am," Maraki rasped, her voice a husk. "I was meant to reshape the ocean. I was chosen." Tumaya shook his head. "You were chosen only by your greed. The ocean belongs to all life, not one tyrant." He laid a hand gently on her forehead and whispered a fast prayer. By ancient law, her fate lay in the hands of the gods. With that solemn invocation, her eyes fluttered shut, and she fell into an unconscious sleep that left her at the mercy of the Atua. The swirling darkness dissipated from her body, replaced by a faint swirl of mundane water. She was no longer the unstoppable sea witch. She was simply a woman drained of her terrible power. News of Maraki's defeat spread quickly among the ocean's denizens. The waters surrounding the cursed cliff returned, slowly, to a calmer state. Distressed fish that had fled now returned in small schools, their scales no longer stained by vile corruption. Over time, the corals might regrow. Tumaya performed rites for the dead, carefully collecting the remains of the creatures that could not be saved, and releasing them to the sea with a funeral chant. It was a bittersweet victory, for though the sea witch was no longer a threat, the cost in life was immeasurable. Yet among the gloom lay hope. Freed from the sea witch's magic, many of the mutated beasts found themselves restored to normalcy. No longer savage or unnatural, they swam in gratitude, occasionally surfacing near Tuumaya's canoe as if to offer silent thanks. On his return voyage to the village, the demigod passed pods of dolphins leaping joyfully, renewed in spirit. Rays glided beneath his waka, a living tapestry of ocean wonders. He felt Tangaroa's blessings ripple through the waves, stirring a gentle hush that soothed the grief in his heart. Back on dry land, Tamaya's people welcomed him with tears and cheers. The elders performed a small ceremony of thanksgiving, offering songs and dances that recounted the bravery of their protector. The village Tahunga gathered the broken shards of the sea witch's staff, safeguarding them in a carved chest buried beneath sacred ground. They would serve as a cautionary relic of misguided ambition and a weapon never to be wielded again. For Mariki, she remained locked in a deep slumber, carefully tended by the village healers who, in their mercy, believed redemption remained a distant but not impossible possibility. The next morning, Turumaya stood at the shore, the dawn painting the skies in soft pink and orange. Where once the ocean felt ill and tainted, it now breathed vibrant life. He recalled the final moments of the battle, the burst of light, the taste of salt and blood on his lips, the primal knowledge that some battles are fought to preserve life rather than to defeat an enemy. In that sense, he had done both, ending Maraki's oppression and restoring the sanctity of the waves. A voice rose behind him. It was the Tahunga, staff in hand, stepping quietly across the wet sand. Your ancestors would be proud. You have upheld the ancient covenants and proven that compassion holds a power darkness cannot comprehend. Turumaya gave a humble nod. I did only what I was meant to do. May Tangaroa watch over us all. The Tuanga rested a wrinkled hand on Tuamaya's shoulder, studying the uncertain expression on the demigod's face. You carry the ocean's burdens in your heart, but remember this: the ocean's song never ends. It flows and recedes, cradling life and, at times, unleashing its fury. We must honor it, protect it, and learn from its depths. Tuamaya exhaled a long breath, lowering his head as waves gently lapped at his ankles. Indeed, he felt the currents running through him. His scars, physical and spiritual, were testament to the cost of guardianship. Still, hope thrived, shimmering like the sunlight on breakers offshore. He clasped his bone fishhook pendant, now chipped from the confrontation with Maraki, but still symbolically potent. He would carry this experience forward, both as a reminder of the cost of complacency and a beacon that guided him through future storms. Far away, water glittered in the rising sun, life surging once again through reefs, kelp forests, and azure depths. Tuamaya knew the ocean's vast domain still held unknown perils. Authors might attempt to claim dominion over it, to corrupt its gentle rhythms. But for now, the sea breathed freely, and so he allowed himself the smallest smile. From that day forward, the demigod stood watch as guardian and caretaker, nurtured by a profound link that time and darkness could not sever. And though future tides might bring new challenges, the ocean's spirit flowed in harmony with his own soul once more, affirming that, for now, peace had returned to Tangaroa's realm.